scientists came along 2 to 3 years ago and said, well, we're looking to see how did that inlet switch, that extra 20 inches of water that came in 1898 in the storm, how did that affect the marshes? So they came in and they drilled core samples into all places all over. The science is a little bit beyond me, but the bottom line is it's very encouraging. These salt marshes recovered, not only recovered, but prospered after the storm of 1898. So that means hope for us in an age of rising sea levels. I think I'm in my happy place right now because I love libraries, I love Norwell, I love talking about the North River. So we'll go through some of these, this kind of an agenda, some vital statistics for the river, a history of the river, how it was used. Basically it was a highway back then. They didn't have highways. They barely had paths that had enough room for one person. So the river was a great way to get around, and it was a place for fishing, for great gathering marsh hay. We'll go into that in more detail, and then on shipbuilding, which is covered really well in other books, but I've got a few things I wanted to mention here. So the thing that struck me was the threats that this river has gone through. Today it looks pretty much like the way I think it looked way back then. The threats to it were, first of all, the industrial activities that occurred around the river. We'll talk about that a little bit. Secondly, this thing that I came across and I'd never heard of before, it's a proposal to reclaim the river that meant to keep the ocean out, keep the salt water out, and turn it into a freshwater river, which of course it is not now. And then the 1898 storm, which you probably have heard about, which basically tore a new path for the river, a new outlet for the river. So the history of the river and its research that's going on today, I think, offers us some great lessons for the environment, for the river in a climate change. Then I'd be happy to take your questions. So to get started, just some statistics. The river's located north of South River, so that's how it got its name, as far as I could tell. And the name goes back to the early 1600s when the English settlers came here. It's shaped like a dipper, so I guess kind of like that, upside down dipper. It curves around like that and goes south, and at one point it joined the South, well, it joins the South River now. At one point the South River, the North River exited further south, but now there's 3 miles there that are part of the South River, but it still connects with the North River and goes out through the new outlet. I hope that's not too confusing, but we'll get some more maps later. I think that might help. And it goes through 6 towns. It provides borders for all of them. I think Marshfield probably has the number 1 spot for the total number of, I guess you call it miles or whatever, of access to the river. The watershed is 59,000 acres according to the North and South River Watershed Association, and that equates to about the same size as the Boston area. Also Walt Disney World in Florida. It's a big area, and it might be even bigger than that, because one of my other presentations, someone asked if they live in Southfield in South Weymouth, the old airfield there. They said, well, is there any connection between that and North River? And I said, no, I don't think so. And then Kezia Bacon from the North and South River Watershed Association was there, and she said, oh yeah, there's a connection. This brook goes into that stream, and that stream goes into this area, and that goes into the North River. So it's maybe bigger than 59,000 acres. And its tidal, it goes into the Massachusetts Bay, and it receives waters from that Massachusetts Bay. And actually, those salty waters extend all the way up to its source. Now, it gets less salty as it goes along, but that ocean is still affecting that river. And by tidal, we mean, the tide goes up and down. Well, that even happens at the other end, at the source of the river, not so much as at the origin. Its length is 12 miles. And the slope, which I don't think anyone's talked about before, but I had to check this, it's almost flat. In the book, I compare it to the Boston Marathon, which has Heartbreak Hill. Well, this has no heartbreaks. I don't know how the water gets from one end to the other, but somehow it does. It's almost flat. This was called a fair. This is another great photo, don't you think? This was taken by my friends Gary Banks and Bill Richardson. Who helped me out with some of my prior books. They are also pilots and photographers. And this photo's in the book, but it's only in black and white, so this is in color. But back in 1643, one of the earliest settlers in Scituate was William Vassall, and he called this a fair river, navigable for boats 10 miles and hay grounds on both sides. So you can see here hay grounds. This is marsh hay. And you can see the beautiful river. The word fair means beautiful, so I think he nailed it back then. But there's more to it than that, and you could go into more detail in the book. But this guy turned out to be one of the wealthiest people in Plymouth Colony. He was also always trying to amass more land, more property. And eventually it wasn't enough, so he sold off his holdings and left for Barbados, where he had a slave plantation there and made even more money than he would have if he'd stayed here, I think. It's an interesting character. So let's talk about fish. There's a fish. I don't know much about fish, but I learned about the American shad from a lecture given by the North and South River Watershed Association about 2.5 years ago, and it's a fascinating fish. And it spurred me to borrow this book called The Founding Fish by John McPhee. John is one of the best writers in America today, and you can read anything by him, you'll be fascinated. This whole book is about the shad, but the way he approaches things, it's just really interesting. Anyway, he calls it the, well, start at the top here. It's a member of the herring family, and sometimes when the early settlers called things herrings, they were really talking about the shad, and sometimes they called shad, which was really, it's the largest form of the herring and the largest member of the herring family. It lives for about 4 or 5 years. Most of the time it's swimming around in the Atlantic Ocean, about 4,000 miles. It's a good distance for a small, kind of small fish. And then it comes back to where it was born, which in this case, actually there's some that try to get back up the North River and encounter dams and other obstructions, but it used to be plentiful in all these tidal rivers along the east coast of North America. So it's called the founding fish for really a couple reasons. One is when the settlers got to Plymouth Plantation, they were taught by Squanto how to fertilize their corn that they were growing. So they get some shad, and they call it shad in their diaries, and plant it next to the, around the corn plants, and that would provide fertilizer for the corn to grow. So it was important to them from the founding of, well, I guess you might say Plymouth Colony anyway, but fast forward to the American Revolution in 1776, that was a founding fish too. That was the basic measure, the basic food that was provided to soldiers who had volunteered to help out the American Revolution. And we'll come back to that in a second. We'll talk about the dams and the barriers that the fish had to overcome. John McPhee calls it the Olympic fish because it has to jump over things and swim so far, everything else. It's a good way to talk about it. I asked my neighbor Skip, what do you know, because I knew he was a fisherman. I said, Skip, what's American shad like? What do you know about it? He said, well, it's a spectacular sport fish. So if you catch one of these, it struggles like crazy. It's a great fish. It would make a great state fish, but Massachusetts already had the cod, so Connecticut wound up naming the American shad as its state fish. And they have festivals. Even today, they have festivals of the American shad, mostly along the Connecticut River. So I talked about the Revolutionary War. There was a soldier called Joseph Plum Martin who served in Valley Forge during that awful winter of 77 to 78, I think. And he said what they got was bread, dry bread and salt shad. The salt shad was as salt as fire, is what he called it. And in the spring, after the winter in Valley Forge, the soldiers moved over to a place near West Point. And at West Point, they got, quote, our good old diet, salt shad. And they handed this out to the soldiers. He had to go inside to the meeting house to check on something. When he came back, his fish was being eaten by a cow. And he said the last he saw of it was the tail going down the cow's throat. So that was life in the Revolutionary War, but this was a very important fish for the... And John McPhee goes into more detail. He says, for example, George Washington raised salt shad. He raised American shad, and he salted them and sold them. So he's kind of a wholesaler of shad. I mentioned mills and dams, and probably my favorite example is the Stockbridge Mill here, which is in Scituate, right near the Rotary, and across from the street from Old Oak and Bucket Pond. And this is the oldest U.S. grist mill, 1650. And the dam that dams up the river, there's still a dam there now for Old Oak and Bucket Pond. That's considered the oldest U.S. dam. It was there by 1640. So it's probably been renovated and reconditioned since then. It provided not only a surface area for fish to swim in and for fishing, but it also feeds, there's a couple courses. One is it goes over to a brook that feeds into the North River, and the other route goes by this mill, and it powers that mill. So this like wheel inside goes around and around, and it turns these stones that grind that's what they call a grist, corn and other grains that were being grown by the settlers back then. So this is a great old example, but this happened all over the tributaries to the North River. So you take take first, second, third, or third Herring Brook, for example, there was probably 4 or 5 different mills along those tributaries. There was no dams on the river itself, but there were dams and industrial sites back then, because you could use it for power, water power. A good example is the Clap Rubber Mill Dam. How many people here know where that is? You raise your hand. Yeah, a few people. This, I'm going to mention it later. Surveyors use benchmarks. My benchmarks are like food related. So how many people know where Previties is in Hanover off of 53? Okay, a lot more. Well, if you go west from there about a mile, the road there's a fork in the road. And if you take the left and go another mile, you come to this place. It's a fabulous, I got a photo of it later, but that was called Ludden's Ford, because a guy named Ludden carried the governor of Massachusetts across the river on his back so he wouldn't have to get his feet wet, I guess. So that goes back, the name goes way back to the early 1600s. But meanwhile, in 1873 to 1934, there was a Clap Rubber Mill, and it spans both the Hanover side up above
and the Pembroke side down below there. And you can see it sprawled across both. This map from 1917 shows you at least 25 buildings that occupied that area. And of course the dam would be right about there. It's still there, or at least there may be a replacement, but there's still a dam there. And now it's parks like that. Now I took this photo in March, so it's much greener and pleasanter than what you see in this photo, but still it's pretty pleasant. You see the white bench on the left is in the Hanover side of the park, and the black bench is on the Pembroke side facing each other. And right in the middle is, you may not see it too well, but that's the Indian Head River that feeds into the North River. So I'm a little bit out of the topic, a little off topic here on the Indian Head River, but that's an important river. And soon after that is where the North River starts. So right near Previties. I mentioned the salt haying. Gathering salt hay was important for the colonists very early on, because when they first got here, there was a lot of woods. There were some Native American farms. They'd been growing corn, but to feed the new population, they really needed to cut down trees and create farms, and that took a lot of work. It could take two or three generations, really, to come up with decent farmland. So in the meantime, they relied on salt marsh hay, like shown in this photo, to feed their crops, to feed their animals, cows and pigs and other animals like that. I'm not sure the settlers actually ate the salt marsh hay, but they ate the animals. And it was also used, the hay was used to insulate the houses, and then used for the different kinds of salt marsh hay. So there are different kinds that they used for thatching on the roofs of the dwellings that they built in the early 1600s. So the salt marsh hay was really important then, and it was actually lasted until early 1900s is probably about when it petered out. This photo comes from the Society of Old Yarmouth and probably goes back to the late 1800s. You can see two guys here and their horse and a carriage, and the carriage cart, I think, was either to transport hay from the North River or from a river over to this pile here, or to take it off the pile and put it in the wagon to take back home for use. But I think they're probably piling this up on the haystack. And you can see this guy has a pitchfork. That guy has a pitchfork. It's pretty tall, but they actually build these up really tall. And these things on the bottom, those are called staddles. That was a new word for me. It's like saddle, except with the word T, letter T in it. So staddles, first they put those in the ground in the marsh to put the hay on top so the hay would not get wet. And then they'd build up this hay pile so it'd get round on the top, so the rain would just kind of run off the sides. So they could keep it there for, into the winter. They could come out when maybe it was icy or snowy and pick up this salt marsh hay and then take it back to their farms. Some objects used in salt marsh haying. On the left is some pitchforks. This is my son, John. As somebody at Previties yesterday said, "Oh, you're looking for that tall, handsome guy like yourself?" They're so nice at Previties. I'm not paid by them either, but so that's a pitchfork. These are all in the Cudworth barn in Scituate. It's a great storehouse of old farming implements, and a lot of people don't realize that. But I dug into that and got these things out. So that's pitchfork is with the metal tines on it, but this one is all wood. So I don't know if they grew that way, or if they just kind of cut into it and then separated it, or what. But that's what they used back then. This is a pole, and I should have taken a picture of two of them. But what you needed is two guys, two of these poles. They'd shove it underneath a pile of hay, and then they'd carry it like a litter or something like that from one place to another. And this came from a farm in Scituate. Now this ladder is inside. You can see it goes almost all the way to the top. So it's about, I'd say you're talking about 25 feet, something like that. And it's way taller than it has to be to get to the second floor here is where the hay would get stored. So my theory is that one is used for those tall haystacks like we saw in the previous photo. And one thing that it was really hard to get a picture, it's hard to find these pictures. These are called bog shoes. When the cows or cattle or oxen would go out in the marsh, their feet would sink into the marsh. Some of them would get stuck there permanently. But to prevent that from happening, farmers would create these. These are all homemade. There's no like Sears catalog or anything for these kinds of things. These are bog shoes that are made out of wood, and they'd fasten them to the bottom of the feet of the oxen or cows that keep them from sinking into the marsh. And I think Norwell Historical Society has some at the old farmhouse, but I didn't get over there. But these are from the Cudworth barn. And then to transport it, instead of, if you could get close enough to it, you'd have these boats called gondolas. And if they could get next to like on the North River, next to the river or one of the tributaries, they could just load in the salt marsh hay into the boat, and then the boat could take it on the river to a lot of other places. Instead of having to slog through the marsh itself, this made it a lot more convenient. And these were pretty popular. And you can see here there's like three guys. They're not, I don't think they're, one guy's probably steering, probably the guy in the back here. These two guys are probably poling. I don't think those are paddles. I think they're long poles that they just push this gondola along. The name is kind of funny, but it's kind of derived from gondolas in Venice, but it's not at all like it. The basic idea is it's very flat-bottomed, so it can go up a lot of streams and into a lot of areas where salt marsh hay is growing. What did I want to say? Oh, yeah, there were remains of what was thought to be an old gondola in the North River, but I think Paul McCarthy has ascertained that it was really a ferry that was there. Okay, shipbuilding. I got to thank the Norwell Historical Society and Janet Watson here, who found all this information, this wonderful information about this photo. We've seen this photo before. It was taken. There was a number of copies of it, each a little bit different. And this shows the last decent-sized ship launched on the North River, called the Helen M. Foster. It was launched in 1871. It was mentioned and talked about in the great L. Vernon Briggs book, Shipbuilding on the North River. And it's also talked about by Mr. Merritt in his narrative history of Norwell in 1938. Now, Merritt was a Norwell guy. Briggs was almost a Norwell guy. He lived just beyond Previties. Fascinating guy, and he was known for this book, but he was a psychiatrist, a nationally known psychiatrist too, which I've uncovered, and I got details in the book. But and Briggs was from a shipbuilding family, so he had this storehouse of information about shipbuilding. So I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I did want to include in the book this great photo, which was its launch. About 10% of the town of Norwell turned out for this event. It was a big deal, and 1871. I thought that's pretty early in photography. Remember Matthew Brady and all his photographs of people in Civil War uniforms. Well, this was around that same time, so this is an early photo. And the Norwell Historical Society is fortunate to have this copy. It's got a great provenance, which I won't go into detail, but Janet helped nail that down, and I put that into the book. This is at the end of Chittenden Lane, and that is still there, and it's just a beautiful view over the North River. I recommend you go down there. Okay, canals. Actually, I talk about this in the book. I did an article that just came out in the summer edition of the Norwell Historical Society newsletter, and there are extra copies of that back here, which you're free to take, right? No charge. And canals have a long history in this country, but also on the North River. But most of these didn't happen, so I got to disclaim that. But the earliest mention I could find was a 1796 map that has these faint lines that went from the Hanover border, Hanover Scituate border, down all the way straight down to the sea, which would have cut out about 40 different bends in the river. You know, it's a very bendy, twisty river. That would have made it a lot faster journey. That didn't happen. But 1801, Scituate is still talking about reserving a place for a possible canal that would enter the harbor in Scituate. 1825, just to give you a point of reference, is when the Erie Canal was completed. It's a huge success, both from an engineering point of view and financial success. From what I recall, the people who invested in this got their money back before the ends of the bond periods, so it was a great financial success. It opened up transportation from New York City up the Hudson all the way out west. So canals could be really game changers. In 1829, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came up with this scheme, and you can't probably see it too well, but it's a copy's in the book. But here's the North River, and that is a sketch of a canal that would head up to the harbor in Scituate. So they were thinking about that at that time. This would have avoided having, at that time, the river went all the way south here, 3 miles, so that would have cut out 3 miles of traveling here. It also would have avoided having to go out into the open ocean. So it would be river and canal all the way up to Scituate Harbor, and then, quick voyage up to Boston Harbor. Well, that was the start of a concept. The actual Corps of Engineers actually recommended the canal, but there was 2 other schemes that were proposed at the time. One was to dredge the South River, so that would make it easier to go down there. And these all came into Congress. And the congressman for this area at the time was John Quincy Adams. You remember him as the President of the United States, but after he served as President, he became our representative to Congress, and he served for a long time. So he got involved in this mess. Daniel Webster did too. Daniel said, I'm practically next door to the South River here, so I could tell you this plan is a good one. John Quincy Adams got approached by a guy who lived in what is now Norwell, and I'll cover that in a second, who was proposing the canal that went north. And John Quincy Adams got interested in it, came down to what's now Norwell, to view the scene and get some information about this project. Well, what happened is there were competing interests involved here. The people from Marshfield went to their senator, Webster, without cluing in Adams, and so there was some controversy there too. But Adams kept great diaries, so we've quoted some of those in the article that you can get back there and in the book itself. So this didn't happen in Congress. So in 1853, it came up again. The guy who was pushing this all along, and I think from all along, was Samuel Adams Turner, and I've included this map of 1879. This is Norwell Center. let's see, the James Library would be right about here, I guess, just to orient you. Here's the North River, and here's Samuel Adams Turner. He made friends with John Quincy Adams. I guess having a middle name of Adams didn't hurt him at all. And the book goes into detail about Adams' visit to Norwell. So he stayed with him, but then they went out to take a look at where the canal would go. Then they came back. John Quincy Adams wanted to meet with some of the other people in town there. Very interesting. This is the it's called Bridge Street and the Union Bridge, just to get you oriented. So, in 1853, this sketch was made, and I've highlighted here there are lines for the canal on the sketch, but I've highlighted it in red, and I think I included a copy in that article in the Norwell Historical Society newsletter. But anyway, that's the North River up there. The proposed canal would cut through here and wind up really at some of the marshy streams that led into Scituate Harbor, which was over here. So here's first cliff, second cliff, third cliff, and then fourth cliff would have been off on the other side. Another plan that did not happen. But what a fine drawing by our Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, dams. What surprised me was finding out that there was a dam proposed for the North River. As I mentioned before, this was not from the shipbuilding industry by that time of 1870, had pretty much gone out of existence, even though the Helen Foster was launched in 1871. The people behind this were not the shipbuilders. These were the agriculture interests along the banks of the river. They owned that property. They owned the salt marshes. They said, salt marsh hay is not selling very well. It sells at a discount to the English hay and the other kinds of hay that could be grown inland in the farms. So why don't we block off this river? This goes all the way down. This was at this time, went all the way down to here, and this was the old exit of the North River that was at Wrexham and Marshfield. Let's put the dam in right here. And guess where that is? Not Previties. Where is that place? Oh, Bridgeway Inn. Bridgeway Inn. Another benchmark for me. So I'll talk about that in a second. So that would have blocked off all the salt water from coming in, and it would turn all this, of course, would then turn into a freshwater. And then it would expand out with the big dam there. They could expand out the water so it would cover some of the salt marshes, and then they could grow more profitable crops. And this got it's really amazing support. They got the leading hydrographers at the time. They got all of them on board. These are scientists and engineers, a lot of them located at MIT, and then located in Boston. These were nationally known figures, some of whom were in charge of the U.S. Coast Survey system, and these were really leading guys, and they came up with this really elaborate, detailed plan. I don't know, I forget how many pages, 50 pages, I'm guessing, with all kinds of details. And they submitted this to the Harbor Commission of Massachusetts. The Harbor Commission liked it too, so they passed it along to the legislature, and they recommended doing this. They did point out that this was kind of an experiment, because this had been done in places like the Netherlands, where they have the canals and the dikes, and the little boy that put his finger in the dike to keep it from flooding and all that. Well, they had spent a lot of time building up their land so they could more profitably farm it and so forth. So this was an idea of bringing it from Europe to America, so it was called experimental. but it got all the support. And then guess what? The Massachusetts legislature approved it. There was one little problem, is that it had to make economic sense. I think, as I understand the terms of the approval, is those people who were going to develop this dam had to come up with, not either with the money, or they had to come up with some way of guaranteeing the project. And the guarantee could be, for example, mortgages on their land, which could, or maybe liens on their property. So if they didn't pay up, if they didn't finance this thing, their property could be seized by the local towns. So it became a financial question. Let me show you, first of all, where that dam was. Let's see, the Bridgeway Inn is right about here. You see the water level there. On the left is in the river itself, high water and low water. On the right, excuse me, on the right is the ocean, and that's the high tide level. So it's actually 20 feet higher than the river itself at the time. So keep that in mind. If we get 20 feet of water in this room, it would probably be up to the top of our chairs here, and we probably want to be getting out. So that 20 feet difference was important, but that's where the dam was going to go. So in late '72, another one of these hydrographers came up with a really detailed plan. It's 8 pages, handwritten, and I found it in the Norwell Historical Society archives. It's just a wonderful find. It actually was reported on pretty carefully in the local newspapers, but having this guy's handwriting is really something. Herschel was noted for, he was at that time a junior engineer, but he became famous for developing the Venturi valve, which could measure the amount of water going through a river or some other object. So he developed it at the Holyoke dams on Connecticut River, and there's a plaque there for him. But his biographer said, you could take this valve and stick it under Niagara Falls and figure out how much water was coming through there. So this is really an advance in technology. So he had great engineering details in this plan, but at the end he says, if this will increase your property values from on the salt marsh from $12 a yard to, let's say, $22 a yard, then you shouldn't have any question about it. You should go ahead, because it makes economic sense. Well, I think what happened is a lot of these landowners had second thoughts. 1873 was not a good year for investing money. In fact, it was a great recession in the country, so things just did not work out. And I was so thankful that they didn't. I've quoted Paul McCarthy in the book that really summarized the situation. But not before there was one last shot, a public meeting to get support for this. The poster on the left I got from the North River Commission. And if you see at the bottom, there's about 11 names, mostly from, a lot of them from Norwell. One important guy from Scituate was Parker Welch. Parker Welch is the one who started with his son, started the Welch Company, and was one of the most prominent people in town. And with his backing, you would think he'd have a pretty good shot of getting approved by the town. Now, he owned probably more land than anyone else bordering the North River at the time, so he had a vested interest in this. That poster advertised a public meeting in early '73. That was in the town hall of Norwell, which is right there. Well, I think it's called South Scituate at the time. But that's right there, right next to where the James Library is today.
So that hit close to home. And some of the other people who signed that poster lived, within walking distance of this town meeting. So the plan did not happen. The idea of putting a cut through the cliff, the area between third and fourth cliff, also did not happen. So in the 1890s, what we had was this beach that ran from, we're looking north here, so it's running from Fourth Cliff in Marshfield. It's a pretty tall cliff. Along the sandy beach, there's a road or a path that went up that way, up to Fourth Cliff. And you can see the edge of the cliff there, and then that's probably like First Cliff out there. I can't be sure about that, but it's a wonderful photo, and it's held in the archives at Harvard. So that's what it looked like back then. So that's before. Then after the storm of 1898, that beach is gone. And the whole beach is gone. So now you have Fourth Cliff and Third Cliff are separated. This is looking south. Fourth Cliff is over there. Third Cliff is here. You notice at the bottom, this is kind of neat, there's a road going here, and that's what led across that beach to get over to Fourth Cliff. And I've seen records of people who said, yeah, we like to take that path to get over to Fourth Cliff because it's better swimming over there. So they get in their horses and carts, go over there. So that was the way to get over there. Down here, this road would, if you go down up the cliff, you could connect with the driftway, which would connect you with Scituate or Norwell or Plymouth or Boston or wherever else you wanted to go. So this was a pretty handy little pathway. And we think it was used, but I think there was historians who say this was based on a Native American path. The inland path, the ocean path, not the inland path, which was further inland, about where Route 3 or 3A might be. Okay, so here's I love this map. This is just sheet 1 of 7. I found this in the archives, the Massachusetts State Archives. And a friend of mine, I didn't actually find it. I found that it was there, but a friend of mine took these photos. He's much more adept at this kind of stuff than I am. And he's actually the one who pointed me in the right direction. When he got to the Mass Archives to take this photo, this is 1915, when he went there to take these photos, he found there was only sheet 1, 3, 5, and 7. The other ones are missing. So if any of you here come across 1915 map of the North River, let me know. We'd love to add it to our collection and maybe let the State Archives have a look at it. If you go on my website, you can download some pretty high resolution copies of sheets 1, 3, 5, and 7. I think I got all of them in there. But this one is sheet 1, which is kind of my favorite. Upper center is Third Cliff. That's what those tiny words say. On the left is Herring Brook, the brook that winds its way down. And let's see, at the bottom in the center, right here is Trowant's Island. Anyone familiar with Trowant's Island? Okay, it's right opposite Fourth Cliff. So here's Trowant's Island and here's Fourth Cliff. And you see these snaky lines that go around. It looks like a hairy caterpillar crawling up the river. Sorry for the analogies, but those are soundings. The Army Corps of Engineers went in and they figured out how deep that water was at each place. So you can see there's a ton of detail in this thing. They spent a lot of money mapping this river. And just to get you a little more oriented, because, well, for a map lover like me, you could spend hours looking at this. This is the old railway line that went across. This would now be Damon's Point. So why did this get done? Well, again, it came before the Board of Harbor Commissioners, except now they're called the Board of Harbor and Land Commissioners, and they weren't too keen about the plans that were proposed.
it was basically to dredge the river there to make it easier for navigation. They said, well, navigation's pretty much gone there except for pleasure vehicles. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of money to improve that. But if we do this other canal that was going from Narragansett Bay to Taunton to Brockton up to the river that was near the North River, we could make this little kind of path. That might make sense then. But that was a pretty big plan. That never happened. Anyway, I mentioned Trout Island, and with all this technical stuff that I've talked about and maps and so forth, people have just enjoyed the area as they do today. So on Trout Island, you have little boys clamming here with their clam bucket. You have 2 women out rowing a boat in what is now the South River. I think that's the U.S. life-saving station that was on Marshfield. That was on Fourth Cliff, and it burned down in 1915. These photos are from about 1911. And then here's a hunter. Hunting was big in that area. Shorebirds were shot a lot, and he's sitting behind some bushes waiting for some birds to come by so he could shoot them. And these photos were all furnished by John Howard, who now lives in Nice, France. But his family had a cottage on Trounce Island. His grandfather took all these photos. They're wonderful, and he was a great photographer. And what John has done is take these photos. Some of them are on celluloid or some kind of plastic, and just converted them into digital form in great detail. And it's a wonderful picture of life by the side of the river, by the side of the ocean, in the early 1900s. So, very happy to get those. And while these people were enjoying that, the waters came in. Remember the 20 feet difference between the ocean and the river? Well, that went to 0. So you would think that would drown out the salt marsh. It might have for a while, but the salt marsh came back. But in the meantime, it developed these what you call ghost trees, and you can see at the bottom here they're kind of white. You can see these ones are without any leaves, and it's not clear if it was either the fact that salt water came in or that it was higher water or both. But that's basically killed off the trees, but they still stayed there. So they're called ghost trees. And I think this is the west end of Bear Island, because I've trudged out there until I started sinking into the marsh, and then I thought I better turn around and go back before I get stuck out there. And I don't think I had cell service out there. But I say Bear Island because back here is Third Cliff, and these houses are the ones that were being built by George Welch, Parker Welch's son, on Third Cliff. That's where I live, actually. And I've done a history of Third Cliff, so I know I could probably tell you which each one of those houses was, and when it was built, what street it's on, and everything else. But I am absolutely sure that's Third Cliff over there. So if the angles are right, I think that's Bear Island. When I was out there sinking into the marsh, I noticed there are ghost trees there, but I don't know if they left over from the early 1900s when this photo was taken, 1911, or if they are just newly created ghost trees. But that's a feature of our river. Now, moving forward to today. This photo, again, was another great photo from Bill Richardson and Gary Banks, who fly around and take these great photos. Scientists came along 2 to 3 years ago and said, well, we're looking to see how did that inlet switch, or that extra 20 inches of water that came in 1898 in the storm, how did that affect the marshes? So they came in and they drilled core samples into all places all over. The science is a little bit beyond me, but the bottom line is it's very encouraging. These salt marshes recovered not only recovered, but prospered after the storm of 1898. So that means hope for us in an age of rising sea levels. Remember? Because as sea levels rise, maybe salt marshes, the ones that are left today, can rise with them. And actually, when they measured these ones, they said these rose 3 times faster than the sea level route rose. And the reason they rose is that the ocean itself, the waves from that brought in sediment and helped build up the salt marsh. So there's hope. But again, it's if these salt marshes have survived. We're very fortunate that these have in our area. The other thing is, if you have salt marshes, they act as a barrier. When the storms come in, the waves come in from the ocean, they can kind of buffer that activity from people who are living on the land and their houses and garages and cars and things like that, which we've seen some of that damage today with climate change happening even inland, places like Texas, Vermont, Connecticut. So all this research, it's really a hot field. It has been, and it's a fascinating field. But in 2024, the federal government, which has these research sites all around the country, did a study, and I immersed myself in that. They have maybe, 15 sites around the country, and each one delved into what happened like 100 years ago. What was the history of that site? How did the salt marshes react to rising sea levels? And they relied on old maps, kind of like what I was doing here. So I felt a kinship with this research that was going on. And then I thought, I should take their research said how many acres of salt marsh they had. So I wonder how does that compare with the North River marshes? Well, it turns out North River marshes are huge. I mean, these other ones are pretty big. I have to caution you that the Great Marsh that's north of Boston that extends into New Hampshire, that is enormous. And there's no coming close to that. There's some big ones in Narragansett Bay, but we could, here in the North River, these marshes could well qualify as number 3 in size, and certainly the quality is good. So I'm really happy to see the scientific progress. I'm unhappy to see the funds being cut for it. Just last week, the federal government, the EPA, ended its research arm, and they've stopped anything related to climate study. And I'm afraid about these 15 different sites that are studying salt marshes. I'm afraid those are in jeopardy. So as long as we have that research, I think there's hope for the future. So those are some of my personal reflections. I have some others. I want to quote a notable resident of Norwell, John Stilgoe, professor at Harvard. Some of you may know him. He said, and I quote this in the cover of my book, he says, "Cherish its flow." That's a good way to look at the North River. Cherish its flow. We're so lucky to have it here. It's beautiful, it's scenic, it's historic, it survived all these industrial activities. It survived the plan to dam it up in 1870. It survived the 1898 storm. It's an important large salt marsh. Overlooked, I think. You don't see a lot of publicity about it, except through the North and South River Watershed Association, which has been doing a fabulous job acting as kind of a protector for this, but they're only as good as the members who contribute to them. And it's an environmental landmark. But I wanted to call it a landmark, but then, I got so involved in the marshes, maybe you should call it a marsh mark, maybe you should call it a river mark. I don't know what to call it, but it's really important. And the future is a question mark. It's up to us, I think, to really treasure this and take care of it. We're really lucky to have it. So there's again, I said this is a hot topic, not only from the scientific point of view, but also from writing. John Stilgoe's book from some time ago called Alongshore talks about his travels up and down, and the landscape up and down the North River. His father built boats in Norwell. He talks about, and I think he still does, and he pilots these little boats up and down the streams there. So he's a guy who has kind of an on-the-scene knowledge of the North River. I get more information from books, but I get information from his books. I get information from Annie Proulx, who came out in 2022 with a great really readable book, Fen, Bog, and Swamp. I'd recommend that. You've got a library right here. You can check it out if they have it, or you can order it. And a new book, which you might have trouble getting because it just came out, but it's called Is a River Alive? And this poses a question which I get into and address a little bit in the book. How should we view these rivers as resources that we can mine, that we can take from, that we can use? Or are these is there something in them that's more like alive? And there are cultures that treat them as alive. I think New Zealand is probably the example of this. But I found this thing which is not mentioned in this book, which just came out months ago. Another great writer, Robert McFarlane. He's he's a very lyrical writer. You just love reading what he has to say. And you can learn a lot about the environment that way. But his point is, we should have a different cultural approach. And I found this information that happened a few months ago in Brazil. They gave a river there that's important for surfing. So they liked the river, but it got polluted, so they said, this river has a right to sue. And so that is one of the key questions that we have in various cultures around the country, around the world, really is, do you treat these as people? We treat corporations as giving them the right to sue. Why not? And they're not real people. So why not rivers? Why not mountains? Why not trees? So there's some interesting kind of philosophical questions there. I'm just happy to have the environmental movement of late 1960s, which I go into in the book. Some of you got here early. I was playing the hit song, #1 song from 1971 was Marvin Gaye's book, Mercy, Mercy Me, The Ecology. Probably the best book, best song about ecology and the environment that you could ever ask for. So I'm happy to have seen that, and I hope that movement survives. Anyway, I want to thank a bunch of people. Thank you to the library. Thank you, Zoe, wherever you are. And thank you to the Norwell Historical Society, which really contributed a lot of wonderful resource, wonderful information, wonderful archival information, and wonderful publicity, including their latest newsletter. Couldn't ask for better help from them. And a bunch of other people who I think I've mentioned here. So, and my family, my daughter Alex is back there with the long hair. Stand up. She's tall. Yeah, I think. And her daughter Hannah next to her. Hannah, stand up. Come on. I like to give these guys a hard time sometimes. But they're there. They'll be available to sell you copies of my books if you want. The book's available on Amazon. It's at Buttonwood Books in Cohasset on 3A, just north of Scituate. And they've been wonderful too. They just weren't able to appear tonight, but they have been very helpful. And if you want, check my website, LyleNyberg.com. I have a few kind of business cards there you can grab on the way out if you want. I have a lot more information. Like I said, that 1915 map, what I could get from it is available for download from my website. There's a link to that great video that we saw
by Carl Swenson at the beginning, because he's got that on his website. So, and there's other material, dribs and drabs of stuff, and free to download.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.